I have the pleasure of introducing to you tonight Will Price, who is the CEO of Widgetbox. Will was a managing director at Hummer Winblad before he went to Widgetbox. He helped the firm invest in Move Networks, Replay Solutions, MuleSource, Star Analytics, HubPages, among other companies, as well as Widgetbox. And prior to joining Hummer Winblad, Will was a senior VP at Pequot Ventures, where he focused on investments in IT. Previously, Will also served as a CEO and COO of several startups, and he also worked with BCG and Morgan Stanley. And before that, he had graduated from Harvard College and earned his MBA at Kellogg, but he's kind enough to come here today and speak to us at Berkeley. So please help me give me a hand to Will Price.
Thanks, Victoria. Can you guys hear me okay? I actually met Victoria this summer when Vodafone asked me to come over and talk to them, so it's good to see her again. Anyway, I was able to find parking despite the fact that I think every news truck in Northern California is outside. I'm not sure exactly what the interest is in the story, but it's a real pleasure to be here today. And honestly, if I look at the list of speakers, I'm way not worthy to be here, but I will do my best to talk to you about my experience. I graduated from MBA school in 1999, so it's been 9 years, and all I can tell you is that whatever you think you're going to do, it's not going to happen. It'll be 100 different things besides that, but I'm going to get to this in a minute, but I think the most confused time I ever had was probably when I was at business school, because when I got to school, I realized that we're all these amazingly bright people, and there was all these jobs I never even knew existed that were possible. And I just remember being intensely confused about which path to choose. And I don't envy the decisions you guys are going to have to make in the next year, if you're first years or if you're second years over the next couple of months as you decide to take offers. But business school is one of those mixed blessings where you have so much opportunity, so many companies coming to campus. But yet, the range of options is just almost limitless. And how do you channel that into something that's really appropriate for you, that realizes your goals and passions? And it's really tough. So I have a lot of empathy for everyone here. So when you get asked to speak, one of the things that people do is we'll find really smart people who've said things before you, and let's see what they have to say about it. This is a joke, by the way, but it's a good joke. Does anyone know who Charles Munger is? Go ahead.
He is Warren Buffett's right hand.
Yeah, he's Warren Buffett's right-hand man, and there's an almanac of Charles Munger. It's like the Benjamin Franklin's almanac, modern-day quotes, and he's one of the wise men in the world. So let's see what he had to say, talking about what the secret to life is. He decided that he actually paraphrased Johnny Carson. He couldn't tell you how to have a good life, but he could tell you definitely how to have a life of misery. And once you know that, you can just cross those off the list and keep going from there. So the first thing is, to guarantee a life of misery is you should ingest chemicals to alter mood or perception. That's good. Focus on being envious of others and resenting the success of others. But then Johnny Carson was the original, that was the Johnny Carson line originally, but he said, actually it's worth going past that to, there's probably some more fundamental ways to guarantee you're going to be miserable in your career and life. And these are his additional guarantees. The first thing is to be completely unreliable. Do not faithfully do what you've engaged to do. I'm sure when you guys get in those group situations, there's a couple of people who may fall in that category. Learn everything you possibly can from your own experience. Minimize what you can learn from the good and bad experience of others. Just ignore that completely. Go down and stay down when you're hit by adversity. And given the abundance of adversity in life, this will ensure that you'll be permanently mired in misery. And the last one that Charles Munger said, and I like this one, is ignore disconfirming evidence and remain certain in your views. Sounds like maybe our president. Be one of those people who would early achieve and later intensify a tendency to process new and disconfirming information so that any original conclusion remains intact. So I got a kick out of this because it was like, okay, well, what's the secret to life? Who knows? And everyone has their own path to follow. But if you want to be miserable, these are apparently very well thought through prescriptions for misery. So who am I, and what am I doing here? So I run a company called Widgetbox. Widgetbox is a consumer internet company based in San Francisco. We're backed by Sequoia Capital and Hummer Winblad, my old firm. And I've been told this is a pretty technical or technology-savvy crowd. So we have, in the last 30 days, about 62 million people have used our product. And it's one of the coolest things about working in the consumer internet space is when you push a release out, and we try to release product about every 3 weeks. Literally, it's like 214 countries, millions of people all around the world using the technology. And that's what I find most exciting about the consumer internet space. And what we really do is, if we think about enabling a kind of a user program web experience. So in the old days when a web page was built, it was an AOL or Yahoo product manager who said, hey, when there's an auto page, this should be the information, it should be placed in these areas. And then my Yahoo came around and said, well, let's let people customize what they should put on this page, but it was still sourced by Yahoo, Reuters News, and other things. And what's gradually happened on the web is that more and more has been turned over to you as users to say, actually, I want to have this functionality, this application. In fact, I don't really want to consume it at Yahoo. I want to consume it on my blog or in my social network, on Hoot, which we just heard about earlier in the application gallery. And so we're in that process of what was called like the atomization of the web, which is basically decomposing applications that were these kind of monolithic applications, and then let users choose, I want this piece, not that piece, and I actually don't want to consume it on your site. I want to consume it on some other site. And why it's kind of an interesting problem is if you're an advertiser and you want to reach an automobile audience, it would be a lot better for you if everyone was concentrated around 10 sites. You could go in and buy autos.yahoo.com or AOL Autos, and you'd guarantee a pretty good reach. And on the web today, only about 20% of the page views on the web come from the top 15 properties, but 80% of the ad revenue is coming from those properties. So you have this very efficient system of buying media through concentration when every trend on the web is about deconstruction and the breaking of concentration and letting content flow to the periphery of the web. Now, as an advertiser, that creates real challenges for you. It becomes harder and harder to get the reach that you want. And instead of being able to buy 2 or 3 sites and get your campaign affected, you're going to have to buy hundreds of sites. So Widgetbox is trying to solve 2 problems. One we've solved really well, which is driving traffic and letting people consume applications where they want. The second one is a lot harder, which is to say, okay, well, how do you then package that distributed consumption up in a way that's consumable for an advertiser who's more used to buying traditional media in tens of sites, not in thousands of sites. And then last month, we were on 500,000 discrete sites where Facebook is just a single site. So it involves really good tracking, good analytics, and hopefully change of behavior. Well, I said earlier, we're good at driving traffic. We're very early still in working out actually how to get people to pay for it. It's kind of a classic consumer internet problem. Having lived through the last bubble, it's an uncomfortable feeling place to be. I'm sure a lot of you guys think through business models. And we can talk a little bit about how investors get comfortable with that or not. But that's what I do. Before that, I was an investor for 6 years, and I worked at a firm called Hummer Winblad. Hummer Winblad is actually started in Emeryville, right out near here. David knows a lot of the guys there. And it is a company that focused on seed and Series A investing in software. And so when I was there, these are the kind of companies that I invested in. I don't know if you guys, anyone watch television on the web like ABC or ESPN. So Move Networks is the company that does all the video streaming for that. It's a really cool company out in Utah. I did quite a bit in the open source space. Are there any developers in the room? You guys use Maven at all for your build system? So Sonatype is the commercial version of Maven. MuleSource is a company that's trying to take TIBCO on or commercialize, basically try to blow up the app server and integration markets through an open source model. Widgetbox is a company we seed funded, and Yield Bill and a couple others. And before that, I kind of got into venture accidentally, I guess. I graduated from business school and joined Boston Consulting Group. And this is one of the morals of the story I want to educate people on, if you humor me to use that word, is that risk is in the eye of the beholder, okay? And career risk is a very relative concept. So I graduated from Kellogg. I didn't know what I wanted to do, so I sold out and went to BCG. No offense to them. It was delayed decision making. I was like, all right, they'll move me across the country. I'll get set up in San Francisco. So I showed up. My wife was pregnant, and I went to work. And for the first month, there was no work. This is the fall of 1999. So if you live in San Francisco in the fall of 1999, it was like the gold rush of 1849. And sitting at my desk every day wondering, when the fuck are they going to give me some work? Wasn't a very good feeling. So I went in and I said to them, I quit. And they said, what do you mean you quit? You just got here. I said, yeah, but and they said, listen, just go to Tahoe, take like 2 weeks. I'm sure we'll sell a case while you're gone. And I just said, no, thank you. I left. Now, the reason I say career risk is relative is that they'd hired a big class that year. Instead, what I did is I went and joined a bunch of guys who, had no money, no business plan. And I decided I'd much rather throw my chips in with these guys. At least I know I'm in control of my own destiny a little bit more. Everyone who stayed, almost without exception, got fired a year later. Because the reason there was no work was because there was no work. Okay? It wasn't because they hadn't sold anything yet. And that was one of the first lessons I got, which was like, and I was a little reckless maybe, but it was a great lesson. So instead of like staying there and getting fired and then being like dumped on the street with a bunch of other really bright people at the same time, because everyone was winding down at the same time, I'd gone and started another company. This was another lesson. The company was my summer internship I did at a company called Infinity Financial Technology. It was another Sequoia company, and we sold trading system software. And it was my first job in technology. I was a product manager for the summer. And right after I left, it got bought for what was big dough back then, $440 million. And the CEO owned a third of the company and did really well. And he became a good friend of mine that summer because I had this kind of reckless tendency to go up to his cube and tell him like why he was screwed up and the whole company needed help and change this and that around. And I used to I knew he used to go to this burrito place, and so I'd go find him and I'd sit down with him. I'd say, look, I've been thinking, you guys got this whole thing wrong, and classic, a little overly arrogant maybe. Anyway, he thought it was funny. He liked me. So, so I get this call while I'm still at BCG thinking about what am I going to do, sitting at my desk staring out the Embarcadero Center at Fleet Week or whatever was going on. He says, listen, we've got this great idea. It's brilliant. I got my best engineers on it. And I said, all right, done. I'm out of here. All right, so the second moral of the story was just because the guy has a lot of money doesn't mean he knows what he's talking about. So I get there. The guy's a centimillionaire, which to me seemed like ungodly amounts of money. And the guy had run a public company. He'd raised money from Sequoia. So I'm there like a month, and I'm like trying to realize, like, you know what? I don't think the emperor's wearing any clothes. I have no idea what we're talking about. What are we building? Who are we building it for? What's going on here? And so at first I was I'm sure they know what they're up to. It turned out no one knew what they're up to. Not only did they not know, the guy had made so much money that he one day came to my office and said, I just bought a ranch in Montana. I'm out of here. I said, what are you talking about? I just quit my job, came working here. You're out of here? He goes, yeah, I'm out of here. You can run the company now. I'm like, A, there's no company, and B, to do what? And so this was another interesting lesson. So anyway, that company was a company called Embark Solutions, and what we tried to do back then was that was when telecom deregulation was going on, and everyone was convinced that the incumbent telephone companies would just get wiped out by pricing from the CLECs. I don't know if you remember Covad and people like that. So what we were trying to provide was like value-added broadband services, the equivalent of like call waiting on your landline, so that as the price war went down, instead of competing on just price, you could start layering service on top of broadband access, VOD, other things like that, and you could make money. Well, that's another lesson I learned, which was selling products through a monopolist who's never had to sell anything before, and on a rev share basis, bad idea. So we only got paid when they sold through, right? They don't sell, they take orders. So selling new product for them is like not good. And it was double whammy. My reseller was VeriSign, which was Network Solutions, okay, monopolist, selling through another monopolist to a consumer who hated both companies. Okay. So we ended up not doing that great. Surprise. So I had 4 months of cash left. No one in the Valley at all, if you said anything about consumers, they would shoot you in the head immediately. It was all about enterprise, and, this is still in the wake of infamous .com companies that had burned through $60 million. I remember literally, Sequoia would not even give me a meeting. Despite I had 7 references from people they trusted. They're like, we're not doing consumer investing. Okay, that's famous last words. They probably would deny they ever said that. Maybe that was just being polite to tell me to go away, but that's what it felt like. So then I was like, all right, shit, what do we do now? So I ended up selling the company to a company that was backed by a hedge fund. When I say sell, it was a very loose, liberally termed, giving them everything for very little. But it got me a job, because they had a CEO of the company who was a senior vice president from Compaq once the company bought my company. It was one of those deals where we have cash, $18 million. You guys seem like some brains and maybe some product, but we have no product, and we just raised money. So why don't we take your product and some of your brains, and we'll put them together, and everything's going to be great. And I'll never forget, the guy told me from Pequot, he's like, it's not two drunks leaning against each other to stand up. And I said, who said anything about drunks? What are you guys implying? But that's what it was, basically. So anyway, I thought that was a very odd, curious comment afterwards. He must have felt very guilty. But anyway, so we were out of totally options. It was that or just walk out of our offices and look for other work. So turns out Pequot was a really fascinating experience for me. Those guys at the time were the largest hedge fund in the United States, and I didn't know anything about hedge funds or really venture investing. I considered it coming out of business school, but it all seemed to me like I'd look at the resumes they wanted. They're like, all right, guy's got to be a PhD in 3 things, started 4 companies, speak 9 languages. Oh, and he's got to work for $110,000 a year as an associate. I was like, all right, forget it. I'm not doing that. So I didn't even bother thinking about it. Anyway, so I started there. They were about $20 billion fund when I started, and it was a pretty interesting experience learning about asset management. And I thought what they hired me for was, they were based in Westport, Connecticut and New York. You work on Sand Hill Road, okay, and your job is find cool companies, private, later stage, whatever, it doesn't matter. And I was like, great, this is awesome. I can find my next job. They're paying me to find my next job, basically. And that was the beginning of 2002. And I don't know if you guys remember that, but that was just brutal. Right, my first year, we didn't do any investing except taking companies out and shooting them in the head and firing everybody. It was the most miserable time I can imagine. I wish none of us ever see times like that again. It was just really nasty. I'm sure you remember it well, right? Bad. So finding the next great thing was a little hard. Although I have to admit, I did get to go to Google in 2001, have lunch there, and walk out going, interesting, and didn't do anything about it. So they were great companies then, and they're always great companies. You just sometimes don't know, even when you're having their free food. Anyway, 1 year turned into 6 years. I ended up doing investment for 6 years. At first it was everything. We would look at a spin out, a Series C deal, a Series A deal, and what I quickly realized was the whole number crunching side of investing is an art unto itself, with its own set of competition, its own financing structures, its own syndicate partners. The Series A investing, totally different set of syndicate partners, very different analytical due diligence process. And we were this company that was trying to take on Sequoia at one end and Francisco Partners at the other end. And all due respect to Pequot, I just decided no one's that smart, right, to do that much. So I said, okay, what do I love? I kind of really enjoyed the early stage stuff. So I went to Hummer Winblad and had 3 really great years there. It's a great firm, old school, classic, bootstrapping, Series A deals. But the entire time I was an investor, I kind of felt like, I don't know, a sellout, I guess. You know, I felt like, you know, I'm young. I have, it's like, do I really want to do this? And I would go through these like serious, like, you know, vent my angst on you guys. But I'd literally sit there and watch these entrepreneurs, and I'd be like, I should do that. You know, that looks like a lot more fun than doing another cap table and writing up another investment memo. But the problem was, like a lot of things, like you get paid more, you get promoted, and I was a partner, and I was like, oh, shit. You know, this is, I can see how this is going to end. So I'm kind of going through some other slides I've got, but I'll just tell you, it's easier. I kind of had this conversation with myself when I'm 65. That's the kind of this conversation I imagine. Like, okay, Will, you're 65 years old. Now you got to talk to the 35-year-old Will. Like, what should he do? Okay, he's got a good career path. He's a made partner, which is not easy. He's kind of established for a young guy in the venture industry, but he's got these other aspirations and goals of wanting to go back and do a startup and do it right? Because the first one was, shall we say, not so good. I just kind of came to the realization that there's more risk in not doing it than doing it. And that's kind of the way I felt the first time around. Sorry about this. When I first left, did my first startup, was there's more risk for me if I'm 65 and I said to myself, you know, you really wimped out. We can talk about a bunch of other things today, but being an investor is a really great discipline. And I remember when I first was in your shoes, a little bit out of business school, because again, I didn't even consider doing venture from Kellogg. There's no venture capitalists in Chicago. In fact, the guy who taught my venture capital class in Chicago was a sausage manufacturer. I love Kellogg. It's a great school, but like when I've lectured, I have friends, you know, go to Berkeley and Stanford, like, oh yeah, like Eric Schmidt was in our class today. I'm like, oh, that's great. I had the sausage king of Chicago. That's awesome. But I remember thinking, struggling with this a little bit, say, all right, is venture capital a career path? Or is it something you do once you've been successful doing something else? You know, and I was like, I should work that out. Is this something you learn and you get really good at just by doing it? Like, it's pattern recognition, and you see 100 deals, you're that 100 times smarter, but if you haven't seen that 100th deal, no matter what you did before, you're not going to be good at it, even if you were a great CEO. Or you're a 20-year operator, and, you know, in that case, shit, I should just start doing it now and stay in it, right? Because you're going to get better every year. You get more insight, more patterns. You know more people. You know what a good VP of sales looks like. You know what a good CEO looks like. You know what a bad one definitely looks like. You know what a good deal looks like, a bad deal, who the good syndicate partners are. So it's like maybe it's that cumulative experience that you get good at it from that, right? It's not so much that you're smart. It's just that your gut's good because you've seen it all. And the other part of me was like, well, you know, maybe it's actually not that. Maybe it's these guys have been there, and like when you get a call in the middle of the night saying, our entire data center just got burned down, and, you know, we're getting sued by 3 people, and, oh, by the way, the deal you thought closed last week, it didn't close, and, oh, the sales guy's cooking the books, and, you know, maybe it's that makes a good investment, because you just stay calm, right? You just don't freak out. You're like, all right, well, let's work it out. What do we have to do to fix it? So anyway, I'll spare you the cliffhanger. There's no answer. I went out and talked to a lot of people, and they all were like, well, no, it's definitely a career path. No, MBAs suck at being VCs, right? It's only real operators. Why would you ever take money from a guy? All he ever did was get an MBA and an Excel model. Like, what's he going to tell you, right? And so I think one of the things that a venture capitalist can do besides give you money is really help you with best practice on execution. And when you have best practice, you reduce risk of failure. You kind of shrink that time to that value I described, and you're more likely to have hit that objective milestone that a third party will validate and give you more money for and continue to go. So one of the things that I try to do, and I try to do a lot as a venture investor, and I try to do a lot now, is to say, okay, there are certain things about any startup that are completely unique to that company. Okay, maybe it's the time of the product market, it's the product itself, it's the team chemistry. Then the other thing, a lot of the things, though, are completely generic. Every company has them. And some of them are really boring, like benefits, office real estate, finding a recruiter. Which recruiters are good? Which recruiters are going to screw you? Which PR firms are good? Which ones are going to waste your money? And so I think when I think about venture groups that are really good, they help a couple ways. They shorten the cycle time to getting shit done that you would have gotten done anyway, but you may have gotten it done when your money was out. They shorten the cycle time to getting stuff done. You want to get to know Microsoft? Boom, done. You want to go see an ad agency? Boom, done. You probably could have gotten to Microsoft, but it may take you 6 months to get there. You only have 2. So that's really helpful. So I think being a venture investor helps you with some of that best practice in a way that works. Candidly, there are not a lot of guys who leave venture. Dave can probably back me up on that. And most of them who do just get kicked out. So it must be a lot of good to it. Anything else people really want to talk about? Otherwise, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of my experiences of moving from one to the other.
Let's talk a little bit about Widgetbox.
Sure. I kind of went. Were you here at the beginning? Because if you weren't, were you here at the beginning? All right. So no, I'm not going to do. I already went through that. So.
Can you talk a little bit about your experience with the risk tolerance side, having a family, doing a membership thing?
Yeah.
Especially when you have a stable job and a well-paying environment.
Yeah, that's a great question. When you're single, you have yourself to look after. When you're not, it's more complicated. I think you have to really have a spouse who's really supportive, and the most obvious impact is like cash flow, right? Like that's a big issue. And then beyond the cash flow, there's like a whole lifestyle implication, which is like, geez, you have to work a lot of weekends, and all of a sudden you're not coming home until 10 o'clock at night. So I think you have to go with your eyes open and set expectations. Like this friend of mine who's a founder of Kana said, he has this great cliche, but I like it. It says, success equals results minus expectations. I always thought that was clever. And you set expectations like it's going to be bad. You got to be prepared for it. And then basically say, okay, assuming that the cash lasts this long, here's what our lifestyle looks like, and budget for it. But it's tough. And one of the things I think the analogy I would kind of use would be like, it's like deciding when to have children. It's like there's not like this magic time where it's like, it's all going to be great. We should just do it when we have nothing to do. It's like, there's this, it's like, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I have 2 great kids. It's just like there's no like magic time, right? There's no like, it's like when you have a friend who's going to decide to get married, he's like, I'm not going to get married. I got to get my house together. I got to get my job together. I got to get this. I'm like, I'd say, what are you talking about? When is this together thing happening? It's not going to happen. So just make the best of it, I guess. So, yeah.
Did you ever consider staying at Hummer Winblad and kind of just being an operational guy for them, or you would come help with portfolio companies rather than leave entirely?
Yeah, I think being the it's like, how would I say that? It's like being on a baseball team and being like the pitching coach. It's like, if you're going to play, you might as well play, right? If you're going to be an investor, be an investor. If you're going to be an operator, be an operator. Like, to be like, the only one I would say would be different than that would be like, you're a bona fide operating star. Like, you've done it. Like, you've done 2 companies, you're 50. You're just like, I'm going to be like the guy who walks in and just gives them advice and helps them out. In a lot of the LBO firms, by the way, have you seen that? They start retaining like Clayton Dublier and all those guys. They like Jack Welch is there. Lou Gerstner's the chairman of Carlyle. I think I can see that. I would be like, I respect that. Those guys are done. They're just hanging out, getting paid to like give advice. But if you're like 36, it's like, what are you like? I don't know. I would say if you want to be an investor, go for it. Be the best investor you can. You want to be an operator, be the best operator you can. So, yeah.
As a VC working in the industry 4 or 5 years ago, was it easy to spot the emergence of Web 2.0? Did it indicate innovation?
Yeah. The most interesting thing I think happened was in the downturn in the economy, selling became really hard. and it became very expensive. Like there's a great Mark Leslie article, The Sales Life Cycle, talks about the expense of direct selling. And what I think happened to me was like enterprise companies had bought all this technology. They had tons of licenses on the shelf. They weren't using it. They hadn't gotten value. The SAP implementation was failing. And like you're a startup with some software technology, and you went in as a company that just spent $200 million on SAP, and you're like, hey, I've got some supply chain stuff too. They're like, great, thanks. And I think what ended up happening was, on Wall Street, it was probably best exemplified. They were growing trading volumes of like 600% a year, right, with quantitative trading, and Wall Street was a very aggressive adopter of what I'd consider like the new wave of enterprise. At the same time, the budget for that stuff was flat or shrinking because they were suffering. So what ended up happening was companies couldn't afford to sell directly because they couldn't get funded to do it. And it was a very inefficient way to sell. You would say, okay, I want to convince you that my product has value. So how would you do that in the traditional way? You'd say, okay, I want to schedule an on-site visit where I'm going to give you a demo, and then I'm going to fly to New York, and I'm going to install a box in your environment, and you're going to let me have VPN access into that box. I'm going to configure it for you, and then I'm going to come back like 3 months later and say, how was the experience? And what I thought was really cool was the innovation was not so much in the technology, although the technology enabled this delivery mechanism. It was like letting customers self-qualify, self-select, and self-procure their own product. And that was the big thing that really was cool. And so if you think about, going back to the Morgan Stanley example, they were buying Solaris servers. Then one day they just stopped and immediately and bought Linux servers. It was all Red Hat, literally from like 500 servers one year to 0 the next year. You had companies like Salesforce.com who would just start selling on-demand software where people could do the same thing. And so the whole cost of the sales model went from us pushing product on you and trying to get you to see us, despite the fact that all these broken promises every other product you ever bought before, to now us basically saying, here's our products, try it. Call me when you want it. Right? Call me when you know it works. I don't have to go to New York to tell you it's going to work and then give you a box and come back 3 months later and then didn't make my quota. I'm quitting. I'm going to go sell for somebody else. So that was the big innovation to me was how do you shift the mechanism and the business practices for selling your own products? And so the innovation was somewhat technical, but it was very much around reducing the cost of sale. And so on the Web 2.0 side, that's what I consider like open source and SaaS. Like if it's an application, SaaS has become very popular. If it's kind of infrastructure, open source has been good. But both have the common element of self-qualifying the customer and reducing that selling expense. On like the Web 2.0 side, I have to admit that was really hard to see. I think like YouTube. I'll give you a great story about YouTube. We were investors in Napster before I got to Hummer Winblad. Very disruptive company, literally. Arguably, well, the record companies weren't happy about what happened, but it was a technology company, right? I mean, Sean Fanning was a technologist who just enabled file sharing, and so I remember when like Roloff Botha did YouTube. I remember sitting down with him and saying, "All right, let me get this straight. Whenever someone uploads a video, you bear storage costs, and then every time someone watches the video, you have bandwidth costs. All the videos are copyrighted material." Okay, it's all this Jon Stewart stuff up there. We just went through the Napster experience, and we got our asses sued for like 5 years. It's like, so that's an example where I was like, I didn't get that at all. And they sold it for $1.6 billion. So it's one of those really fascinating things, I think, about entrepreneurship and innovation is that, like, it comes out of places you wouldn't expect. And I think one of the things I saw Roloff quoted today actually said, like, one of the things that makes Sequoia great is their appetite for risk and like trying stuff. And if I have a lot of respect for them. So as on my board, they're awesome, investors. And one of the things that's interesting about Widgetbox, I can talk about this, is that there was no business model for widgets when we started. And a traditional investor would have been very put off by what we were trying to do. And they've been very interesting in their advice they've given me, which was don't prejudge the business model. And as someone who's trained as an MBA like you guys, a lot of you guys anyway, you want to be very prescriptive and kind of declarative about how you think about things. You're like, here's my thesis for this. Here's the business case for this. I got an Excel model that tells me like these things should happen. And one of the things that I was going to talk about is like one of the advices I've gotten as an entrepreneur, which has been really good, is that you have to have a tolerance for ambiguity that really is very uncomfortable. Oh, sorry. And putting that, lighting yourself in the eye like that. So one of the things I got there, it was like, the whole time I was like, all right, what's the business model? How are we going to make money, right? And it seems like a logical question to ask. And their advice is like not to not have a business model, but it's to say the business model will, if you focus on what the things that they really care about is growth you're not buying, where the levers of growth are starting to become well characterized, and you can start tweaking the levers and seeing the results so you understand causality a little bit, then you can, over time, start seeing the model emerge. And that's a very, one of the things about the consumer, and I think that's very difficult. It's two reasons it's difficult, is that as a company trying to get funded, if you don't have that growth, you can't get funded because that's a basic requirement. So a lot of risk gets put back on entrepreneurs and consumer companies that maybe enterprise companies wouldn't have. You could characterize a problem set in an enterprise and maybe get funded ahead of traction. And the second one is being able to, and this goes back to some of the leadership issues too. Like I saw this quote from Google. It said, what's the secret to good startups? And it said something like, okay, it's about small iteration, not big change. It's about so iteration, changing a lot, but not about major products. It was about focus and about team chemistry. I was like, okay, well, that sounds like pretty basic thinking, right? And in the consumer internet space, one thing I found is like, it's about that iteration, that gradual change where you start understanding causality and then starting to fund it a little bit better. And then like a patience not to be overly declarative and presumptuous about where that may take you. And that's kind of a hard thing to do. And the other thing about that I want to say a little bit about change is that startups, so 3 legs of the startup stool, right, according to Google, is like iterate, focus, and have good team chemistry. Okay, so startups are the most stressful places you can imagine, right? You have finite amount of cash, big companies want to kill you, you have more things to do than you have people, and you're not sure how you're going to make money. Okay, so how do you have good team chemistry when you have massive stress in an organization? How do you enable a culture of iteration and innovation without having chaos ensue? And how do you stay focused on what you're trying to do when you've just been told you have to discover, right? You have to kind of evolve into the answer. And that's one of the hardest things that I've had to wrestle with is, as a leader, you want to kind of feel like, all right, we're going this way. Come on, everybody, let's go. Like, oh, this way, come on, let's go. And then you realize, like, wait a second, I don't even know where I'm going sometimes, right? So, and then you feel really bad about yourself, like, well, that's my job. I'm meant to like tell people where to go. And you realize, like, actually, no, that's not your job. Your job is to enable people to help you discover those things. And you have to kind of let go of the control a little bit. Let go of trying to say your role as a CEO is to have all the answers and to provide a framework for people to actually help you discover those things. That's been really hard for me. And so we've done a lot of work to try to think about how do we be innovative without being chaotic? How do we stay focused while still being open to possibility? And then how do we keep good team chemistry when we have all this stress going on? And one of the things that I found that really helpful is the way you think about product development. And so traditional software is like a lot of MRD, PRD, engineering spec, development plan, test plan, release. That's the traditional cycle. And what ends up happening is you end up having a very siloed organization where people like throw documents over a wall and then it ends up coming out the other side. And if I can believe one probably thing that really helped me when I first got there, I realized like there was no collaboration going on, very static and serial development process, and it ends up happening always like Chinese whispers. When you get to the end of the cycle, you're like, this is not what we wanted, but it's too late, and you just sunk all this money into it. So one of the ways to enable, I think, kind of this collaboration and process of discovery is that we've really gone into the agile development process really hard, which is to say it's not about knowing for certain how to implement a product. It's knowing for certain what the business case is and then letting the engineers decide how to implement it. And that you get this great benefit between the people who actually understand the technology, decide how to do it, but you can control the boundary conditions within which they're trying to solve and say, and that's something that I think Google maybe got a lot better than Yahoo, for example. I think Google has a proven track record of doing a better job recently. And part of the reason is that they're very engineering-centric in their approach, and they recognize the engineers are maybe the smartest people in the company, and that the business person's job is to help them understand the problem set and then the boundary conditions, and then say, okay, go. And so there's no MRD or there's no PRD process, and that's what we've tried to take away a little bit as well.
Well, I'm sorry to say that we're out of time.
That's all right. Don't worry about it.
But thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah.